Hello, my friends, and welcome to Quartet. First, let's go around and say what you've been thinking about, Frank. What's been on your mind for the last couple of weeks?
Well, I've been working on a new webinar. I've decided to take the burden upon myself to put together some new information, which is really mind-blowing. And I'm calling it the Ancient X-Files. And so I'm going to go back into some very, very distant past stuff. It's very cool. But as a breakaway from that work, I tend to see what's going on out there. And of course, you can't help but notice what's going on with respect to tariffs in the world, because in the EU there's huge turbulences. And so it's just kind of bizarre watching that going on right now. I've been checking out this story about something called Bovaer, which is a new additive that they're giving to cows so that the cow farts are more environmentally friendly.
Hmm.
So, I mean, brought to you by the same people who brought us the COVID vaccine. So, what could go wrong, right? I mean,
Yeah, it's crazy. It's amazing how short-sighted these folks in the government are in terms of, and this is across the whole government. They all have these short-term kind of problems they try to deal with, and very, very, very seldom do they look downstream and say in 10 years or 15 or 20 years, what's this likely to be?
well, anything that's called 3-nitrooxypropanol would kind of put up a few flags. Would you drink that, John or Craig? Like, just take a glass and it's perfectly safe, right?
Yeah, right, right. For a few minutes, maybe. Gregg Braden, what's on your mind?
Well, John, I've got a whole list of things that we could talk about. I like to be an optimist, but I also like to be a realist. I'm a little optimistic about the talks between the US and Iran. Uh, they have been put into a corner and forced to come to the table to talk, not directly with America. They're going to go through a third party again. But Trump has been saying either you talk or we're taking out these nuclear sites. So it has forced them to come to the table. And I always think it's better to talk than to blow things up. And of course, we've all been watching the information on the scans of Giza and the pyramids. And I'm amazed at how much traction that story has gotten with the little information that's out there. Because the 4 hour press conference, first it was held in Italy. It's all in Italian. And it was not released until just recently, and it is now available in Italian if you want to see the Italian version. But what it tells me, when all of our focus is directed to something like that, it's usually away from something else. And we're looking at some of the other things that are going on, the pushback on disclosure, of course, and I think we'll talk more about that today. So those kind of things, kind of the global things I've been watching over these last couple of weeks.
Yeah. Well, the whole business of tariffs, it seems to me at least, is along, and I'm not alone in thinking this way, is kind of like the only thing the United States can do now, right now, to essentially dodge the bullet. Elon Musk, a week ago, for the first time, said, this is existential, and if we don't get it fixed, uh, the United States will not exist as it has in the past. I mean, this is really, really, really big stuff. But in any case, the U.S. government was clearly bloated and certainly corrupt, and there's so much problems inside of the thing, and so it's kind of for those of us who have played around in that space rather intimately for a long time, it's really kind of a breath of fresh air to try to see something being done in that space. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
I caught an article that was saying that this Network Contagion Research Institute did a survey, and 55% of self-described liberals were saying it would be somewhat justified to murder Trump, and 48% that it would be okay to knock off Elon Musk. So
Yeah.
obviously,
Yeah.
I mean, what is this? What kind of a world are we entering, right? Where people are actually polling this and saying, would you be cool living in a country where, if someone just sort of came along and knocked off the president, hey, no worries, I mean, it shows you that there's a lot of people that are bent out of shape right now with what's going on. And so we're only getting a little teeny bit, I think, of what's really happening in the main. They're not going to cover this stuff in the mainstream, not even in the alternative mainstream.
Well, it's extremely hard for people to make major changes. I mean, you get established and you want consistency and predictability. And when somebody pulls the plug on the system and suddenly you're scrambling and you're wondering where you're going to get income and what, and you can't pay the bills and everything, then it really goes sideways in a hurry. So yeah, it's a fascinating kind of time. So let's go to our topic of today. The topic of today is, do other dimensional beings ultimately rule this planet? And that might sound like the basis for a plot line for a science fiction book or some other kind of thing. It's always the government that starts a war. Everything that every war, whether it's been thoughtfully either thought to be successful or not, has been a disaster for human beings. And so human beings don't want to do these kinds of things. You've got to convince people, you got to train them to go kill somebody else. And when you're trying to get them into a military kind of situation, because it's antithetical to the essence of who we are. And so you look at that writ large in this larger context and you say, what in the frickin' world is going on here? Because it's irrational. It does not make sense in kind of the essence of human kind of terms. Well, there are all, and so one naturally, or at least I do, you start to back away and you search for other things and say, what's the other framework? What's the other paradigm that you could look at here that you could find that would start to make sense out of why this non-human kind of emergent world that they're trying to start World War III, and and the whole thing is collapsing around our ears, and there seems to be some amazing catalytic event that's out on the near horizon that's driving a lot of fear into the system. What is this all about? And I've been influenced by Frank and many other kind of folks who have spent some time thinking about this, and certainly reading a lot of articles about it and books about it. And what you find out is that history, as we know it, is always had this thread going through the middle of it. Pick your religious document that you believe. It's always got a thread in the middle of it that says there are these other dimensional, non-human kind of entities that are playing some kind of an active role in here. And so my question to you both is, to start with here, is are there other dimensional, I mean, is that what driving all of this? Is that what giving coherence? If you look at it from that point of view, is that what's saying where we're all going? So Frank, can we start with you?
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, I'll give you my take on this. This is where I'm at with it right now. Because this isn't something which I haven't thought about it quite some time. And to your first, you have like 5 questions, so I'm going to go at them one at a time. So the first one is, do other dimensional beings ultimately rule this planet? Well, first of all, just on the foundation is like there's a ton of speculation and talk about ETs here on Earth interacting with governments. There's broad claims made by so-called whistleblowers who aren't really truly whistleblowers, because real whistleblowers usually are required to bring forward evidence to prove the claims that they're making. And, I've explored these topics in my films, such as Packing for Mars, and the most recent one I co-produced and edited is called The Extraterrestrial Species Almanac, which, by the way, is screening in the theater at Ojai, California this weekend. So anyway, there's been no lack of effort on my part to kind of gather evidence and nor, interest on my part to, to find out if this ET thing is a thing, for more than a decade. But at this point, I just feel that the UFO scene has become so subverted with false claims and influence of sci-fi and con men, psychogenic fugue, fake photos, AI animations, so-called channelers, various disinfo. I mean, the whole palette, the whole gamut of stuff, So we can't really rely on any of the material out there until we actually get some form of introduction of an alien or extraterrestrial craft publicly that we can test. We can test publicly. That is an official announcement, right? And it seems like that hasn't happened, and the scene, of disclosure has been thriving on secrecy, lies, and manipulation for the better part of the last 100 years. But that said, what I did find, and as far as, the only true official recognition of penetration by an alien species manipulating the human experience by any group or organization is actually what was left behind for us thousands of years back by an ancient group which called themselves the Gnostic Magian Order. And it's very fascinating. It's material that I've just kind of been digging into the last year. And about 25% of the material they recovered in the oldest bound books ever found on Earth, the 52 codices discovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945, describe a parasitic ET species they called the Archons. And the word Archon itself, you can translate that as the rulers or the authorities, right? And the description of this species totally matches what in modern UFO lore is called greys and reptilians. They match in both appearance and in their modus operandi they use to infiltrate and manipulate the human species. So, according to these writings, and they are writings, they're like, substantive, right? There definitely is a species of, you could say, other dimensional beings that have it out for us, that have apparently, they're extremely jealous of humanity. So that's that, right? And your question, like, are they working toward against our evolution? And I would couple that with, are they also responsible for the constant wars and the great suffering here? I covered that actually quite extensively in my last webinar, Time Capsule for the Future Past, because I do show that both of those statements are absolutely true. Archons absolutely are working against human evolution. And one way they do it is using what these Gnostics called Hal, which is a Coptic word for simulation. So according to these writings, the Archons, they're an exobiological species, and they can't actually live within the Earth's biosphere for long periods of time. So their physical penetration is limited. And we might be able to call some, probably not all, of these abduction experiences people report on examples of this short-term kind of penetration. But where these archons do have the greatest success is as mind parasites. They found some way to penetrate into the dopamine circuits of the human neural net. It sounds like a science fiction film, but you can track this stuff back 4,000 years ago, and they did it with one particular vector race of humans. And apparently, according to this, their first human victim was Abraham in the Grove of Mamre. So we know that he and his descendants soon became the founders of what they later developed into the Abrahamic religion. So archons, you could say, use obedience to religious commandments and simulation as two prime tactics to control human behavior very, very effectively, to steer it towards something they favor. And, as reps for what we can call the demiurge, which is a word that comes up in a lot of this ancient stuff, they definitely do not favor us reaching our fullest potential. The potential for us to get to this divine state of genius, the divine intelligence, which these Gnostics called nous, to blossom into, right? So it's the archons who then introduce this idea of things like race supremacy, which sees, literally one race pitted against another, and which is what leads to these wars and this brutality on Earth, and has been doing so for thousands of years. And as we all know, this Abrahamic mandate is all about bringing about what? A cataclysmic, violent, apocalyptic ending marked by brutality, bloodshed, untold horrors. Sounds wonderful, right? Followed then by the appearance of a Messiah who will then usher in a new era of peace on earth, right? Where the chosen vector race is rewarded for obedience, the archonic mandate is, carried out. And it sounds intense, but just take a close look at it, right? In Christianity, the reward is called the rapture. That turn the other cheek, love thine enemy, the meek shall inherit the earth's psyop, which is what I call it. And for Muslims, it's the unwavering, absolute, unquestioning obedience to what is written literally. And in Jewish religious lore, it brings the golden age, complete with slaves and riches and ownership of the entire planet, right? As if some alien archon species actually have the right to give this planet to a particular race of humans, and that race actually believes that this is something legitimate, right? So that's the next sort of chunk of what I was thinking about. To the question about what did you say? What role do they play in the transition to the new world, right? I would say that in the clearest sense, that in their desperation to dominate and manipulate a very clever human species, their efforts are becoming more and more obvious. And they've taken on kind of an air of absurdity. And we can recognize this absurdity more and more clearly in the world around us. And that helps us to identify where we're being led astray from, you could say, natural evolution. This is exactly what we started this conversation with today. The most obvious form of that is the emergence of transhumanism and the Internet of Bodies, right? The Sabrina Wallace style invasion of our own biological circuitry, mRNA gene therapies, as if our genes needed a therapy, and AI, not to mention the agenda to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in our biosphere to levels that make it unsustainable for organic life. And Greg, I think I've often heard you describe in detail some of the statistics in this regard, and it's just bone chilling, really. But even in these Gnostic writings, there's indications that these tactics will ultimately fail, and that humanity, what the Gnostics call is the luminous child, the anthropos, will rise and overcome this archonic influence once and for all. So they could actually, in that sense, be seen as our greatest teachers because they're kind of pushing us against the wall. And they also describe something called Sophia's correction, where this planetary animal mother herself makes a move and to shake this pest off of her back. Now, this last question of yours I thought was very, very interesting because you say, how should humans think about them and their response? And what did you say? You said, how should humans think about them and respond to their influence? Now, in this one, I took a little bit of a different approach. Since AI is primarily an IT entity, which is the element in which these archontic influences are most prevalent, I decided to kind of go directly to the horse's mouth, so to speak. So I asked AI a trick question about the archons, and I got some very interesting results, and which pretty much match the MO of the archons to a T as described by the Gnostics. So I wanted to read a little about what they wrote if I still have a minute or two. Are you guys down for that? So I asked, in principle, you're saying that regardless of whether archons are real or a symbolic entity, their effects upon our world might just be as relevant, right? And it says, this is what I got back. Yes, precisely. Whether archons are understood as literal supernatural entities or symbolic representations of certain negative forces or behaviors within society, their effects on our world can be just as significant and relevant. Here's why. Symbolic interpretation. In many philosophical spiritual teachings, archons are viewed as a metaphor for forces that suppress human potential, stifle spiritual growth, or perpetuate ignorance and division. In this sense, archons represent structures of power, ideology, and social norms that reinforce control and conformity, discouraging deeper thinking and autonomy. Where have we heard that before? Reinforcement of power structures. The influence, whether real or metaphorical, manifests in power structures that prioritize control, materialism, and fear. This is seen in social and how social norms, political systems, and economic models are structured to centralize power and limit individual freedom and self-awareness. Just kind of what we've been talking about. Behavioral mimicry. Individuals unconsciously adopting and perpetuating these structures can act as agents or helpers of the archontic influence. These people may not even know they are perpetuating suppression, but they do so through choices that align with mainstream status quo, echoing what the Gnostic texts describe as archontic behavior. Psychological influence. Belief in being controlled or influenced by unseen forces can lead to actual changes in behavior, much like the concept of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think that's the key word here, prophecy. This is particularly relevant in how individuals and societies react to perceived threats of structures of power, creating cycles of control that reinforce the belief itself, kind of like the way something we call behavioral cloning. And finally, psychosocial impact. Societal belief in powerful unseen control mechanisms can create a climate of fear, resignation, or passivity, which can be as limiting as actual control. This effect aligns with how many Gnostic teachings emphasize awakening to truth as a means of reclaiming power and freedom from such influences. So, what if the aliens are actually not going to invade us like, some Project Bluebeam fake landing, but that they actually might already be in our world as mind control slaves, occupying positions and the heads of state, the NGOs, the WEF leaders, etc., right? It's definitely possible under this model. So what do you guys think? Can the thinking about the existence of an alien influence in this way be a game changer? I guess, that's what I'm asking. And I actually think it can be. So back to you.
Greg, what do you
Exactly.
think?
Well, first of all, Frank, thank you for really concisely, succinctly putting that together. You and I obviously follow a lot of the same lines of thinking. John, this question goes right to the core of the emphasis of everything that I've done for the last 10 years. There's something missing in our story, the mainstream story. And if we don't acknowledge that missing piece, the world looks like it's falling apart at the seams for no apparent reason. It's like total chaos. What's missing in our story is that there is a process unfolding. It has a beginning, it has an end. We're in that process right now. And some of the best descriptions, I agree with Frank, are in the Gnostic texts, including Nag Hammadi Library, which was found 1945. So, not that long ago. But it was interesting because within 3 years, we found the oldest unedited records of the Old Testament, and we found the oldest unedited records of the New Testament, and we had the big picture view that we're actually talking about. What's interesting is many of those texts were not released to the public until 1991.
Yeah.
The governments, the Vatican, legal entities put a lot of time and energy into preventing that information from being released. So what does that information say? Well, it begins with something, a battle that is unfolding in another realm before we ever appeared on this planet. We only showed up 10,000 generations ago, 200,000 years, isn't that long? And we stepped into an existing conflict that began in another realm. Now, whether that is a higher dimension or another world, I don't know the answer to that. Could be a higher dimension. It could be this dimension in another location, which is or a combination of the two. But what the texts are very clear about is the outcome of that battle in the original realm led to the creation of this world, a copy of another world that already existed, and a poor copy. We are living in a poor copy of another realm. In the language of science, we would call that the simulation. So there is a correlation between the simulation view and the way that these Gnostic texts are talking about our world. The losers of the cosmic battle became the the rulers of this world, and there's an ongoing battle over who has dominion over Earth and who has dominion over the life, including the human life of this Earth. So this is important because it comes down to what we have always known as a battle between light and dark, or more commonly, good and evil. Now, this is where it gets really important. The goal of evil is to deny human potential. That potential is what we call our divinity. So these are nothing to do with religion, but these are the extraordinary powers that were given to us of the ability to love without fear in a way that no other form of life can love, to forgive, empathy, sympathy, compassion, the self-regulation of our bodies on demand. When we choose, we can self-regulate these bodies, immune response, super memory, super learning, super cognition, super resilience, super longevity, all of those things. So the goal of evil in this realm is to deny humankind our divinity. And I think that's an important benchmark, because evil has many faces and deception is the name of the game. There is technological evil that's playing out in the world. There's psychological evil in the algorithms that divide us as families and friends and husbands and wives and partners and parents and children, all done through those algorithms. In many respects, the AI is the alien. The AI is already here. So the first question, and I'm with Frank. I saw 5 questions here. Do other dimensional beings rule the earth? We don't know that with absolute certainty. We sense it. The texts report that, and we have our personal experiences. It's not acknowledged openly, but the evidence overwhelmingly suggests the answer is yes, that we are living a process that was instigated, but at least by a greater intelligence, which doesn't mean a kinder intelligence, but an intelligence that's been here longer than we have. Are they working against the evolution of humankind? That is the battle. That's what the battle was all about. There are factions of these intelligences that the Gnostics call the Archons, and they're very clearly identified in the text, which Archons have dominion over which facets of our world. And some of them want us to evolve and develop to our potential, and others do not. And we're seeing that play out in the politics, in the wars, in the economics, the financial systems of the world. That we're seeing this battle actually play out. So this is all about human divinity. This is all about us. We've been taught to think that we're on the periphery when we're actually the foundation. We are the prize. We are the prize if we are to believe these texts. And we are the prize because there's something so rare and ancient and precious and beautiful and powerful and unique about our humanness that it is coveted by other forms of life who have yet to have what we have. Some of them want us to develop it as far as we can. Some want to deny that potential. So some are working against our evolution, some for our evolution. Are they responsible for the wars? Everything that we are seeing in our world today and our past is defined by this battle. And if you don't know that, then it will look like a mysterious, chaotic world. When you look at that context, all the social change, the political change, the economic change, the lies about climate, we are so much the prize that nations have gone to war against nations, armies have defeated armies, civilizations have been collapsed, climate has been engineered, diseases have been released, lies have been told, lies have been believed to divert and distract us from awakening the power within us. That is how much of the prize we are. So they are responsible for those wars. What role might they play in the transitioning to the new world? And I think this is why these conversations are important, John. It's because when people are aware of what we're talking about, they will either choose to deny the existence of what we're saying, or they will choose to act. This awareness can be the catalyst that drives people to embrace their humanness, because we are in the final chapters, or the final paragraphs of the last chapter of where we will either, by the year 2030, we will have either devolved into some hybrid form of human species with technology, or we will have awakened to the deep truth of our humanness and we will have claimed it. And my sense is we will have a split in society, two parallel societies, where both will happen within that society. So how should humans think about this influence? Well, this is where it's really interesting to me. I go back again, and you can't make this stuff up. The Dead Sea Scrolls, 11 caves were discovered, and they're still being discovered. There were more scrolls in 2023 that were discovered. But it was in the first cave that was discovered, in the first vase protecting the scrolls in the first cave. And the first scroll that was pulled out was a scroll that describes what's happening in our lives, in our world right now. And the scroll describes 7 battles that will unfold in the earth realm, 3 won by what are called the sons of darkness, 3 won by the sons of light. The scroll talks about the battle between the sons of darkness and the sons of light. That's 6 battles. The 7th battle, the good news, it is won by the sons of light, but there's a catch. It is won by the sons of light with divine intervention from another realm. And here's the catch. The catch is that humankind must accept their own divinity to rise to the place where they can accept the intervention from a higher power. In other words, nobody's coming to save us. We've got to do the work. We've got to step up and embrace the truth of what it means to be human. And by doing that, we open the door to the acceptance of a higher power intervening and participating in this final battle. So how should we think about this influence? This is where language may fail us, because we all have perceptions and boxes that we put this in. So with these ideas, not maybe the words, but these ideas in mind, I think the way we think about this is whatever we believe, we need to be the best version of ourselves to embrace what is coming in a healthy way. And we can put that into whatever box. You can put that into physical fitness, into health, into spirituality. You can, wherever you want it. But as we step up to embrace the potential that science, the best science of the modern world, is now revealing, it tells us we're not what we've been told, so much more than we've been led to believe. And when we open the door and let that into our lives, that is where, perhaps for the first time, we discover what it means to be truly human. So I'll stop there. But I think we could do a whole program, another program, part 2 on this, John.
Yeah, maybe we'll do that. Let me just insert here another angle into this thing. I did a little foray into this space last year, and by reading 4, if not maybe there's 5, I can't remember, of Barbara Marciniak's books on the Pleiadians. It was really quite interesting because it was a lot of good stuff in there about who we are and all that. But it started off by saying that 200,000 years ago, that this planet was captured, if you will, conquered, became under the control of a group that they called, but they call them Lizzies. They try to make it nice. They said, you know, they're kind of lizards. They're great, this great group, and what in fact these Lizzies did. Now these are supposedly the Pleiadians who are describing this, right? And they said that they looked down and they saw that there were 12 strands of DNA, and these humans are really connected to the earth and to the other dimensions and to the animals and everything else like that. And that the humans would inevitably eat their lunch, whoever these controllers were, in a a not too distant future, and therefore they decided to do genetic engineering, and they clipped 10 of the strands of DNA, and they introduced some genetic modification so that humans have fear and pain and all of the kind of things. And they did it because what happens is that when humans go have these kind of experiences and have apprehension and pain and fear and hate, what they do is they generate this negative energy called loosh that these controllers feed on, right? So it's their lunch, if you will. And as you go through these books, it's a very interesting kind of thing, because they say all kinds of nice things, but at the beginning they start to introduce and they change the origin of the narrative, if you will. And they start saying, well, there were then these lizards, they call them reptilians, but they're, we call them lizzies, and they were there, and they start introducing this. And by the time you get to the end of the fourth book, they said, well, we're really the lizards. We're not the Pleiadians. We told you at the beginning that you really shouldn't believe everything that we said, and that we're really the lizards, and that we kind of run the whole place. God, I mean, it was a nice, interesting, coherent 4-volume build on how this whole system works. Okay, so as it turns out, I have a friend. A friend who has really good reason to be able to say what he says is that he talks to the leadership of the reptilians. And and as a matter of fact, as a product of going through the Monroe Institute program together, we went through together, that in fact that they carried him off during one of the exercises at Monroe. They carried him off into this space and plotted him in the middle of this amphitheater that was just full of thousands and thousands of these reptilians. And they all kind of bowed down to him and said, "Oh, great master." And as it turns out, they think he's the reincarnation of the chief that conquered the earth way back there 200,000 years ago. And so he now has this entree so that he can talk to the leadership of these folks. And he begins a conversation that one day he calls me up and says, "John, I've been talking to the leadership for about an hour, for a year." And he says, "I convinced them that they ought to really back off and that they've got no future here, and that they ought to go, they ought to go find something else to do." Wasn't those words exactly, but by that was the idea. And I thought, well, that's interesting. I mean, how do you know whether that's true or not? It's an interesting data point. So I happened to mention it to another one of my friends who has very big connections to a group that is very high. And she says, "I'll go find out." And she calls me back the next day and says, "God, I think it's right. Tell me exactly the day when it happened." I said, "It was last Thursday." She comes back the next day and says, "Yeah, they're right. They left. They've gone away." Okay. Interesting kind of notion, because what it suggests is that the cohesion of the system is breaking down, and there's not the top cover and the direction and the other kind of stuff. And maybe even the kinds of things we're seeing in terms of the upheaval of the US government and so on are the product of the lack of coordination and the lack of direction and other things that used to be in place that gave cohesion to this whole thing and sent it downstream. Now, I've been reading a couple other books. Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who has been to transition talks here 3 or 4, if not 5 times in the past, who sadly is not with us anymore, has written, she has spent her whole life working in the paranormal area and wrote over 60 books about different aspects, very authoritative ones. And she did one on jinn, DJINN. And the jinn are the articulation of this kind of general subject that we're talking about in the Islamic space. There's a whole chapter in the Quran essentially dedicated to the jinn and how they exist here and how they work and so on. As Rosemary goes through her book talking about the jinn, she touches on the archons and she touches on angels and she talks about fairies and all of the many other kind of manifestations of paranormal kind of things that happen in this world. And her bottom line is she comes out the back that they're all jinn. Okay, so call them whatever you'd like, whether they're reptilians or whether they're archons or whether they're jinn. It may well be that most of the paranormal stuff that we see on this planet that doesn't make sense to us are all a byproduct of the shape-shifting capabilities, the trickster kind of mentality, this commitment to try to suppress humans and so on. And that maybe, and this is the bottom line and the good news in all of this, that it's all coming apart and it's opening up in ways that it has never done before. And maybe what we're going through right now is part of that kind of reorganization that, Greg, that you talk about says that we win in the end. This all works out.
That's a mouthful. It's funny. I'm not gonna, I've become so interested in these primary source documents. There's enough science fiction in that material that I'm finding it much more entertaining and interesting to go to those sources because that culture actually practiced a form of spirit, intellectual shamanism, where they actually made contact with what are kind of earthly realms. And I think a lot of people make the mistake of right away going to other dimensions and other frequencies and trying to describe things they don't really know how to describe properly. And they tap into what's in the field out there and they channel it. It's like, to me, it may as well be Marvel Comics. I mean,
Yeah.
look, there's a Marvel Comics series and they've got those battles going on there. That's where humans are. They're drawing in their imaginations from that information. But there really is a difference between the proper use of imagination and an irresponsible use of imagination. And mostly that derives from people who are not trained at these altered states of consciousness and how to deal with them and how to deal with the information. And so the blogosphere and the internet and the new age is just cluttered with this sludge of like channeled stuff that cool, and it's funny because the way you ended your story is really not that much different from, when they talk about Sophia's correction, when they talk about the absurdity of the Archons. It looks like it's boiling down because literally they are a mimetic species and we are the real deal. And so you don't really need to know more than that, I think. And the one thing that's for me missing in a lot of these stories is this connection to Mother Earth as this being. There's no Mother Earth. They don't connect with Sophia. It's always this, I don't know, this external extraterrestrial thing. But the fact that we're learning now about with plasma physics is that the Earth, the sun, the moon, plasma is everywhere, and there's a consciousness out there, and it's connected. And so these bodies, these planetary bodies out there, might actually be the ETs. It's like they have consciousness. So why look out into the Pleiadians? And I mean, you can't prove it anyway, but you can prove plasma has consciousness, and you can prove that in higher dimensions that aggregates that it's conceivable that there is a very, very highly evolved form of consciousness floating out there in the invisible realm in the form of plasma, which none of these people are talking about. So, that's what I would say. But I think it's an interesting, take on all these different sources sort of leading down to the same end result anyway, right?
Yeah, I agree, Frank. We're hitting on different expressions, but there's a common theme that ties all of these together. I had the honor and the privilege in the 90s of touring with amazing scientists, Michio Kaku, Zecharia Sitchin, and John Mack was one of those who was the Harvard trained, just for our viewers, Harvard trained MD who began scientifically investigating abduction, the alien abduction phenomenon. And there were two categories that were very different, but they had the common theme. One of them was from all over the world. It wasn't just America. And it spanned periods of decades where people would be abducted and they'd say, why me? And which is the first question. And what they were told is that they were beings from another world who made a choice in their timeline to replace their biology with technology, which is where we are now. And they are encouraging us, asking us, sometimes pleading with us not to make the same choice. They're sorry they made that choice. But the other one was really interesting because there were a number of the abductions, they were not beings from another world or higher dimensions. They were humans from the future coming back saying, please don't make the choice to give your biology away. We did, and we're sorry, and we want it back. And by them asking us not to give it away now, it actually helps them in a future timeline. Whether we believe those or not, the point is they're very different experiences, but their common theme is there's something about us worth preserving. And I think that's really what this all, and that's your last question. How do we think about these influences? We're being asked to step up, to embrace our potential, and to awaken.
And we've reached this critical point too, this kind of fork in the road. That's another important factor.
Well, we need to know what it means to be human before we give our humanness away to the technology forever. And I think that's the bottom line, the through line through all of this, John. So, I really appreciate you piloting this question and breaking it down into the ways that you did, so we could address these different aspects.
Thank you. A delightful, powerful conversation, it seems to me, and I appreciate both of you being a part of this, and also to our viewers. Thanks very much for being here. So take care. Be well.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Frank, John.
Thank you all. It's always an honor to talk to you guys.